Good morning, everyone. For the record, it is February 9th of 2022, and it is an honor and a privilege to have everyone here. My name is Nathan Klug, and today, as you are seeing, hopefully everyone can, we'll do a test to make sure everyone can see my screen, but we are going to be talking about the Washington Long-Term Care Trust Act is the full title. We've been shortening it to the Washington CARES Act. But that is what the focus today is. I'm very excited to be able to talk about this information and some of the things that are coming in the pipeline that could potentially affect long-term care in lots of different states and also in all states with some of the potential regulations that are coming in the pipeline. But I'm getting ahead of myself right now. I want to take a step back and do a little bit of housekeeping. This is going to be a little bit different of a webinar than we usually do for these agent-facing webinars. I am actually going to unmute everyone so that you have the ability to talk if you want to. And there'll be places that we have that conversation because this is something that I want to be a little bit more of an open forum discussion, as well as understanding what happened in Washington and also how that's going to affect the rest of the states as well. But let me go ahead and do that, and then we'll do a couple tests to make sure that everything's working just fine. So first and foremost, I just allowed everyone to talk. You do not, of course, let's see. All right, we just hit the button for everyone. So again, for those, because I just saw a bunch of people jump on now as well. Again, I just unmuted everyone. So you have the ability to unmute yourself. This is going to be meant to be as a little bit more discussion because this is important information that I want everyone to understand, because not only is this going to change part of the industry of one of the products that many of us sell, but it also is a very large opportunity for those that don't sell long-term care. And many of you, I know a lot of the people that are on here, many of you I don't, but we all have clients. And those clients, every single one of them needs some form of long-term care. And with some of the things that are happening with regulations, this is going to be important for us to understand what's going on with the regulations, how this affects our industry. And the third piece is the opportunity that we have to be able to capitalize on that. So really quick as a test, for those that do have a mic, they're in a quiet place, unmute yourself and just say hi. It doesn't have to be long or anything like that. And it can be all at once. We're not going round robin. There's a lot of people on here, and I know not everyone's going to speak up, but.
Hello.
Hello.
What's going on, Nathan? How are you doing?
Hey, Nathan, it's Milan.
Perfect. All right, so I see a bunch of people jumping on. Good, glad the mic's working and everyone can hear each other. That's the first thing. And then for everyone else that's not using a mic or not in a quiet place, go ahead and I'm going to do by a raise of hands real quick, and everyone can participate in this. Before we get started, everyone by raise of hands, who has heard of the Washington CARES Act? So raise of hands, who has heard of the Washington CARES Act? So we got about half of everyone has heard of the Washington CARES Act. We'll lower everyone's hands now. So we got about 50% of everyone that's on here that has heard of the Long-Term Care Act, which is great. So it's a good mix of people that have not heard of it. And then there's another that have heard of it. We'll see as we go along the level of that everyone understands and what this looks like. So first and foremost, I'm going to usually we're going to have Nationwide, and Alyssa as our rep is on. I will be honest, I don't know what happened. I've not heard from her this morning. So we are missing our resident expert on long-term care, but I will make sure that you have Alyssa's contact information afterwards. She is one of the people that has her ear to the ground on what's happening with not only what happened in Washington, but also other states that are going along with this as well. So I'm going to be filling in the blanks on that side right now, and we will go forward from there. But let's start with what is the Washington CARES Act. So I'm going to walk through this white paper. It is super simplistic, and I'm just going to go over the highlights. This is something that everyone will get afterwards, but this is what the Washington CARES Act is about. So first and foremost, this went into effect earlier this year, but this is the basic concept of it. I'm going to hit the overview points. Is number one, this applies to W-2 employees in Washington. So if you're a W-2, if you're a 1099, this doesn't apply to you, but W-2 employees are going to pay a premium tax through payroll deduction to participate in a fund that the state is putting up for long-term care. And so this is the rate that it's at. Initial premium rate is 58.58% of the individual's wage. So for every $100 earned, that's 58 cents. So wages will be taxed without limitation or capped amount. So if someone's making $100,000, then that's basically, what is that? We all don't have to be good at math to understand this, but let's see. 5, 8. So that's basically $580, which is not tons, but it certainly adds up. And there's an option for self-employed individuals to elect coverage if qualified. So this is where this became a mess. So if qualified to be exempted from the payroll tax, the resident must apply during the short time frame spanning from October 1st, 2021 to December 31st. So this is the important piece that happened in Washington. If you already had long-term care or applied for long-term care within this time frame, then you were exempt from having the payroll deduction from your W-2 employee check to participate in this fund because you already had long-term care. So we'll get into what happened in a second, but those people are exempt. If you had long-term care before this, or you got long-term care during this time, October 1st to December 31st, then you were exempt from the premium tax. So benefits for approved services will become available starting January 1st, 2025. So there's a 3-year waiting period. And the maximum lifetime benefits are $36,500 per person, regardless of how much money you're putting into the fund. So let me ask everyone a question first and foremost. So raise your hand, and I'm expecting that no one should be raising your hand. This is going to be a little bit rhetorical. Is $36,500 enough for an individual to be able to pay for long-term care?
No.
And yes, for those that have their mic unmuted, a no is even better. You're absolutely right. That is woefully underinsured for long-term care. It would not take care of enough long-term care insurance to make that happen.
Hey, Nathan, where did they come up with that number?
So this was one thing that long-term care experts and that have been participating and having this conversation have all said that Washington basically asked no one in the long-term care industry about numbers or statistics or anything like that. So as far as I understand it, from what I've been told, this was a pretty arbitrary number. So I don't know how they came up with this, Jason. There is no rhyme or reason from everyone that I've talked to about why they created $36,500 per person. And there's nothing within the legislation that actually goes through and explains why that happened as well. So yeah, it's kind of a weird one.
Thanks, Nate.
So, go ahead, Jason.
No, I was just saying thanks for the answer.
You're welcome. So eligible beneficiaries, anyone 18 or over, anyone who's not disabled for the age of 18, meets the requirements of assistance for the ADL, so 2 out of 6 activities of daily living, and has not exhausted their lifetime benefits. So has not already is going to use the 36,000. Benefits will not be available to individuals who have already permanently retired, thus are unable to vest into the program, are not residing in Washington State when qualified to receive benefits. So suffice to say that quickly asking some questions. Do you guys see some holes in how this is possibly going to work for Washington? What are name a couple holes that you already see? So Jeffrey says, even if it's based in Washington State, it is a low benefit. One of the other things that happened too is, like I said, if you moved out of Washington, well, you're no longer qualified to receive the benefits, even though you've paid into the platform.
No coverage for 3 years.
Yeah.
What happens if something happens in those 3 years?
Exactly. Waiting period is 3 years long. Coverage is not enough. We've already discussed that. I mean, there's a lot of different things that this was a gigantic mess for. Now, on that note, what happened in Washington was this. There were about across the board from the carriers that were in Washington doing long-term care during this time, the carriers did not get much heads up that this legislation was coming down the pipeline and starting. So what ended up happening for people to get on the exemption, there was over 86,000 applications for long-term care, whether it be long-term care, riders on life insurance. So to take a step back, this is for those that are not familiar with long-term care, there's really 5 ways to pay for long-term care. One is you pay for it out of pocket, so just your own expense. Number 2 is there's traditional long-term care policies. There's very few of those in this case. Number 2 is riders on life insurance, riders on annuities, and then the last one is asset-based long-term care policies. So those are the 5 categories. We're not going to go into each of them in detail right now, but just know that there's lots of options to exist, and 86,000 applications went through Washington at that time. Now, what ended up happening through that is because every single company that was doing long-term care got bogged down with all of those applications. As of right now, there's only, and they're just coming back in, there's only like 1 or 2 carriers that are selling long-term care in Washington. Everyone else pulled out of Washington for their long-term care policies because they got so bogged down. They're way behind on applications. They're not even close to catching up right now. I believe Mutual Omaha just started February 1st of this month, this year, of taking applications again for long-term care. But a lot of them other ones are still not in there. So there are people agents that, of course, that capitalized majorly off of putting their stamp in there, being in that environment and saying, hey, this is what's happening. I can give you long-term care options and you can be exempt from the premium tax for the Washington CARES Act. And there were agents that wrote, lots of business from that. So there's an opportunity within that. Now, there's still some things that people are seeing about the longevity of how long these policies are going to stay intact, because there's also nothing in this overview of the Washington CARES Act that says that the state is going to check every single year to see if you still have your long-term care policy. So some of the carriers are suspecting that clients are just getting the long-term care to prove that they're exempt from the premium tax and then dropping the policies afterwards. So we'll see what the numbers come out with over the next couple months. They're still taking a look at it because they're still counting all the stuff in and seeing how it's going to work. Right now, the Washington CARES Act is on hold in the state of Washington, even though it said it was going to go begin January 1st because of how much of a mess it's been. So Washington, first state to come out with this. It was a huge mess. It still is right now. They're still sifting through stuff. But let me ask this, let me take a step back and based on what I just said, and if this were to come to other states, which there are a list of other states, we'll get to that in a little bit, that are looking at this. In your guys' own words, based on what you understand from all that, I mean, how do you think this affects long-term care right now? And do you see this as an opportunity to be able to offer long-term care to your clients? So let me ask that open-ended question, but what do you see from all this and that basic overview of Washington? Got a couple people raising their hands. So Jody or Jeff, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, it's coming down the road in some fashion. And if it does, and if states start to domino, you're going to have a volume of applications. If you had a calamity just based on Washington State with carriers, I could imagine what's going to happen if, let's say, even 3 states approve this at the same time.
Absolutely. And on that note, Jeff, I mean, Washington is a rather small state. There's not a lot of people in Washington. I think, what, I'd have to double check, but like total of about 800,000 people. So 800,000 people or something like that, and 86,000 applications came through. That's, I could not even fathom if it's happened in Chicago, in Illinois, and California, places that have, you know, Chicagoland area has 10 million people in it by itself.
The other thing, really quickly, getting back to the benefit, I don't see anywhere where it states what levels of care are covered by their state program. So,
Also true.
so example, if they're basing it on Medicare's, then it is eliminating intermediate and custodial, which is a major portion of benefits that are paid out.
Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely correct. So apologize. We have in Washington, there's 7,766,000 people. I was way off base. But still in the entire, that's the entire state, you know, Chicago as an example, you know, 9-10 million people in the Chicagoland area alone. But yes, Jeff, you have an excellent point on that side of, you know, there's a lot of confusion about what's happening with this. That's why right now it's delayed, it's paused. There are just now a couple carriers that are getting back into the state that are now able to offer long-term care insurance again, but there's still a lot of them that aren't. So that's really where the opportunity is coming from on that end, is that let me I'll have to pull up the other sheet, but the Washington already came out with this. Right now, the states that are closest to coming up with something like this is California is the closest right now. There is something in the legislation right now. It's not approved yet. It hasn't been signed. It could be signed sometime this year. Now they're going about it a little bit different. They've actually talked with long-term care experts. They've talked with some of the carriers and things like that. So hopefully this isn't going to be a mess, but the soonest that, you know, long-term care experts are saying that California is going to come out with this regulation is it's not going to go into effect till 2024. So it's a couple of years away, but here's the piece that they're talking about that's important for us to understand is California right now, based on how the regulation is and the law is right now, it's basically stating that if you have long-term care before the law gets signed into place, then you're exempt. There's not a time frame after this is signed. So there's a I want to create a sense of urgency within everyone that if you are selling long-term care, and really quick, another raise of hands, who here is actively selling long-term care? So only a few. I've got 3 people right now that are actually selling long-term care right now. There is, and I apologize, there's a few people that jumped on. I'm going to open up and allow you guys to talk as well, if you so choose. But there's only a handful. Now, let me give a statistic on that end. So right now, only 8% of everyone over the age of 50 have some form of long-term care. And you can translate that down to people that are less than 50. That number is probably even lower. But statistically speaking, 8% of people over the age of 50 have long-term care right now. So that is a huge population of people. That is even less than the amount of people that have life insurance, which is a much better number, but it's than long-term care. But that's really where the opportunity is coming in. That's why what's happening in Washington is so important for us to understand. And there's other states that this is coming down the pipeline for. Like I said, California is the closest. Illinois is another one. And I'll pull up a list in a little bit that has the other states. But here's some points just for everyone to understand on that end is, number one, if you have any clients in any of those states specifically, like I said, give me a second, I'll actually pull up the list and what that looks like. But if you have anybody in Washington, in California, in Illinois, which I know there's a bunch of people on here that have them, now is the time to have the conversation about long-term care. And if you're not familiar with the long-term care and how it works, there are people that we have experts on. We can get you quotes. We have a phenomenal resource within that area that understands all of those different types: traditional riders on life insurance and annuities, asset-based long-term care. The options are out there. And right now, using the regulations that are coming down the pipeline as a means to have the conversation. Now, let me take a step back. This is not a scare tactic. You want to just have a real conversation like, hey, did you know about what happened in Washington? Do you know that? And explaining that, and use this white paper. Like I said, I'll send this out to everyone of what that looks like, so that you can, this is a client-facing white paper that Nationwide created. There's other ones out there as well. But that will be good to be able to utilize within your practice to have that conversation. So really quick, before I jump into and get other states and things that are other regulations that are coming in the pipeline, any questions about Washington right now and the overview and what the actual ruling was and what's going on over there? Any questions or comments that anybody has? Okay. So that's Washington. There are, like I said, California is the next one in the pipeline. The other thing that I want to mention on this too of regulations then is there is also something right now, and this is where I wanted to have Alyssa talk a little bit more specifically, but I'll fill in the gaps because we've had this conversation beforehand. Is there's also a regulation that something like, not exactly with what happened with Washington, but there's also a federal regulation that is being discussed right now that would do this for every state. And they're figuring out what it is. And let me ask this question too of just understanding the marketplace as well. Why do you think, who here has an answer to this? Why do you think the government is asking this question? Why do you think they're trying to put in regulations and be semi-nice, okay? Why do we think the government is putting regulations like this in place?
Can I give you my opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Because it's a really expensive part of the I would say the life going with the life expectancy being so high these days, people don't have enough money to go to retirement. So the government needs to, it's a problem coming up to take care of all these people and are going to get older and they are going to need help. So they need to create a fund to cover all this. And they need to put in a set of urgency, because it's no way that there is enough money to cover that. So I think is a sense of urgency in the government, because the population are getting older and living longer, and there is no planning for that.
I don't think there's any better answer than you gave, Juanita. That was the same direction that I've talked about with long-term care experts, is exactly that. Is there are lots more people, and I'm not going to repeat what you said. You said it the best, Juanita. But that's exactly what's happening. And that's why, with only 8% of people over 50 having long-term care, when they can't pay for it anymore themselves, they go on Medicaid, and therefore the government pays it. And that's something that is a rising expense that they're seeing. So they're trying to figure out ways to be able to do that, which is why what we do is so important within that. And I think one of the major areas that I want to make a point on throughout this entire conversation is the need for more agents that have their health insurance license to be able to talk more about long-term care within the conversations that they're having. I know there's, even for myself, like when I was selling, I talked about life insurance, I talked about annuities. I did not broach the long-term care conversation as much as I should have. And I think that's something with our responsibility as agents. And also, there's of course the stickiness to the client by selling more policies and providing more solutions. There's of course we're going to end up making more money in commission by selling more products. But at the base level of what we're doing and why we have our license is to help people. And long-term care is one of those things that is the least discussed within the industry by most agents because of all the other lines that are out there. And it is a phenomenal opportunity to be able to talk to those clients about it. So I'm not as much going to get into how to have those conversations and what that all looks like. Just understand that between our team that we have here and people like Alyssa, there's people like Jackie Slaughter. We have experts on most of the carriers that have long-term care policies. We can connect you with those people, connect you with experts that can give you presentations, information, flyers, the works to be able to have those conversations about long-term care with the clients that you're working with. But it's extremely important. And the more that we can do right now to be able to have that conversation, the better our clients are going to be. And they're going to be exempt from whatever the government puts in the pipeline, which to put it basely is not going to be sufficient to take care of their actual needs. It's going to cover something. But I think one of the things that's going to happen with federal regulations and state regulations is there's going to be a shift in mindset. There's going to be a more discussion about long-term care, which is going to work to our advantage. But if they're on some of these programs, they're going to think that they're covered. And the reality being is that they're not. That's never going to be, the government is not going to provide enough money for them to be covered for long-term care. And that's really where we need to be educated, armed, and dangerous on what those conversations look like, and understanding some of the regulations that are happening and in the pipeline, especially in those areas, so that we can have a real conversation, not scaring them, but a real conversation about what's going to happen and what's coming down the pipeline so that we can help them today. The sooner they get it, the better. Let me pull up the sheet again then and go through a couple other aspects. And then we'll kind of do some wrap up and see if there's more questions as well to go along. But here's the, I kind of went through it earlier, but here's the opt-out for the program. This is what qualifies as long-term care. So long-term care riders on life insurance and annuities, qualified long-term care insurance contracts, so those traditional long-term care policies, long-term care riders or policies purchased under group coverage. And then general definition might include some chronic illness riders depending on their structure. So what's important to mention on here is we all understand, who here understands living benefits or these accelerated benefit riders? Got a bunch of raising hands. So for those that aren't familiar, I know there's a bunch of people that are. The accelerated benefit riders are built-in riders to policies. They're already existing. You don't have to add them on. They're already, the cost structure is already different, but they're typically terminal, critical, and chronic illness riders on a lot of these permanent life insurance policies, and some of them have term. It is important to for everyone to understand that those accelerated benefit riders, those long-term, the living benefits do not count as long-term care. It is not defined as long-term care. The states that are looking at these legislations are not including that as long-term care. So it has to be a true long-term care rider. So there's only a handful of carriers. So for example, 2 carriers that we work with, Nationwide has a true long-term care rider on their life insurance, their permanent life insurance policy. John Hancock is another one that has a true long-term care rider on their policies. There's a couple other ones out there. Those are the more prominent ones. But there's not a lot of ones that have true riders. There's lots of carriers that have the living benefits, but not a lot of carriers that have the true long-term care riders. So understand that as well. And then with these other ones of annuities, like I said, same thing. It's not just, it has to have the long-term care rider built into it where, you know, it'll pay for a portion of the whatever the cost is for long-term care, or it'll double the benefits. Some of those are counting. There's other places like, I know many of you on here are familiar with One America. So One America's asset-based long-term care policies are really good in that area. There's a few other carriers that are on there as well, but just ask us, we can direct you in the right place to get access to these policies. The biggest thing is with them, all of them have phenomenal materials and client-facing materials that can help you have the discussion about long-term care. So this is important to understand what qualifies as long-term care and what doesn't. So those sort of things. And then again, this is Nationwide specific. I'm not going to go through this on this webinar, but this is Nationwide specific solutions within there. You know, Your Life Care Matters or Nationwide Care Matters 2. And there's a bunch of other policies out there as well. On that note, I know I have a couple more things to go through as we're running through this. Alyssa, I will invite Alyssa back on and find out what happens so that we can have, you know, an expert talk about the kind of the conversation. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of information about what's happening with this, with long-term care. Again, Washington already happened, gigantic mess. Right now it's on delay. There's a few carriers that are in Washington again. So if you have any clients in Washington or anybody that knows anybody in Washington, start having the conversation. California is next. They have a regulation in legislation right now. It is not signed yet, but if you have anybody in California, start talking about California's Long-Term Care Act and start having that conversation. And as another side note with California has even less access to long-term care policies than most other states because the insurance commissioner does not approve as much of that out there. So there's even less carriers than there are in the other states for California. We have access to them. Don't worry about that side, but have that conversation sooner rather than later, because the rule is out there right now as it stands. As long as they have long-term care before the legislation gets signed, then they will be exempt. But after that, that may not be the case unless they change some things. Other states are coming down the pipeline as well. I can't do two things at once apparently and talk and find that at the same time, but I will make sure I get that list out to everyone that registered in an email. There's about 10 states that are thinking about this. And then the last thing to mention with this long-term care legislation is that there is talks on a federal level of a program like this as well. We're nowhere close, but it's coming. There are discussions. So any questions about those the regulations and any discussion or comments on what that means for you? I know there's a few people that are selling long-term care actively. I don't know if for those that are selling, if you guys are selling in those states, but for those that are selling, real quick, any comments on, have you used or discussed the Washington CARES Act, or have you used it in any of your conversations to be able to talk about long-term care with your clients? Yay or nay, or have you used anything of what's been happening with legislation to help you sell long-term care? And I'll take that as a no. Any questions that anybody has on, like I said, the Washington CARES Act, what's going down before I do a last minute close up? We'll end early today. There's no reason everyone just hanging around and staring at a screen. But any questions anybody has before I wrap up?
Nathan, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, well, yeah, no, it's still morning where you are. Yeah,
It is. It is not where you are.
Hey, is there going to be a copy of this presentation available?
So the quote unquote presentation that I used was a nationwide white paper. Everyone will get that white paper. You will all also get the recording of this as well. And then I will also include on the email that will get sent to everyone. You will also be getting a few people's contact information that are experts in long-term care. So these are people within our network, either carrier representatives or experts within the area that you guys can talk to at any time. Pick up the phone, have a question, get materials from them. I'll send that in the email as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Tim. Anything else before, like I said, we wrap up and we get out of here? All right. If there is anything, we'll be on just for a couple more minutes. So again, cannot stress the point enough. Long-term care is important. 8% of people over 50 have long-term care. They're woefully underinsured. That's 92% of the population that's over 50 that needs some form of long-term care. We have access to the tools. We have access to the experts. Touch base with your agency or your business development advisor and ask those questions. And the highest recommendation that I can give to everyone is just start having more of these conversations. It could be as simple as asking, do you have long-term care? Start there and then begin that conversation. Pull in the materials that you need to, but if they're open to having the conversation and you're then looking for a solution on the back end, we have all the types of solutions. It's just a matter of you asking for what you need. So on that note, I appreciate everyone's time. You will get all this information, the recording, the white paper. I'll send the states as well, and contact information for a few experts. in the long-term care field later today. And then if you have any other questions, you know where to find us. So thank you for your time, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and happy selling. All right, talk to y'all later.